Well, that time has come, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Lauren Lavine. Many of you know me as the Digital Dentist. I'm really looking forward to tonight's webinar. As of this morning, we had almost 500 people that were registered for the webinar, and a good number of you already are here. I'm just going to do a short introduction for a couple of minutes. I want to make sure that we can get to all the slides. I'm joined by a very good friend of mine and colleague, Rohit Joshi, tonight. So we want to make sure that that we give him as much time to talk as well. All of you on your screen should have a little GoToWebinar control panel. Now, typically we ask that we wait to the end before we go over those questions. But tonight I would certainly encourage you, as we're going along through the presentation, if something triggers a question that you have, go ahead and ask it. The way this is going to work is that Rohit's going to be running the slides. We're going to be chatting back and forth. I'm going to have an eye on the questions. So if something comes up that I think is relevant for the slide that we're on, I will definitely do my best to get to that. In the next couple of days, there's a few things you're going to get. First off, when you are logging out tonight, there's going to be 2 questions on your screen. Basically, do you want me to follow up with you? Do you want Rohit to follow up with you? Just indicate if you want either or both of those, and we'll make sure to follow up with you as well. Many of you know through past webinars that I do record the entire webinar. So this is recorded. If you have to leave early, if you're logging in late, of course you're not listening to me right now, but you'll hear this afterwards. But within the next day or so, you'll get an email that has the links that you can download the entire webinar. So don't worry about anything. The other thing is that if any of you are interested in continuing education credits, I do make it available for AGD PACE. Unfortunately, it's not something we can offer for free, but I will send out that information as well. So tonight we're going to talk about 10 burning questions about HIPAA compliance and the dental practice. I get a lot of questions about HIPAA. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, unfortunately. There's a lot of things that people aren't necessarily clear on, and hopefully we can do our best tonight to explain some of that. So let's just go on to the next slide here. For those of you who don't know me, I did practice as a periodontist for 10 years. Over the last 10 years, I have primarily focused on technology. Anything that I think is of a technological nature, whether it's computers or networks or data backup and disaster recovery, and of course HIPAA compliance is a really popular topic as well. So that's really been my focus. And what I've been trying to do with the webinars over the last few years is to give you information that I think is going to be interesting. It may not always be my exact area of expertise, but if it's stimulating and maybe a little controversial, but hopefully beneficial, that's really the goal of any webinar that we do. And of course, that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight. Let's go on to the next slide here. So a really brief overview of the 10 questions that we're going to try to get to tonight. Number one, and I get this unfortunately a lot from a lot of dentists, is that, why should I really care about this? This doesn't really affect me, does it? It's HIPAA. This is for hospitals, isn't it? And the answer is no. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about compliance, what that means in the real world versus what it means in the electronic world. Number 3 is, of course, you need to know about the fact that this is not something that you can just kind of hope that is going to go away, that no one's monitoring it. There are government organizations out there, like attorney generals, who do monitor this stuff and can definitely ding you pretty significantly. And we'll hopefully talk about some of the fines that you're potentially looking at tonight. What's the difference between compliance, which we all need to do, of course, and security? What about the patient consent? If a patient says, well, I consent you to discuss my care with another practitioner, is that all you really need? And I think most of you can probably guess that the answer is no. We'll talk a little bit about what some of the HIPAA requirements are. I know we do have some people from Canada on the call tonight as well. So like in Ontario, for example, they got HIPAA, and different ones in different provinces. It's all kind of the same. I mean, the laws may not be exactly identical, but the same concepts, I think, are true both in the U.S. and Canada. We're going to talk about email. Most of us, when we're sharing information with our colleagues, are using email. And the problem is that most standard email that you're using is absolutely not compliant. We'll hopefully talk a little bit about what it means to have an addressable concern. And I think there's some misinformation out there about how you get away from these addressable concerns with HIPAA. We'll talk a little bit about firewalls and why every practice should have something like that in place. The last two things that we'll talk about is how do we get your practice compliant, and of course, with all of this, we're so busy and we have so many laws and rules and regulations and running our practice. It's got to be convenient. There's a way that we can get to some level of HIPAA compliance with our day-to-day running of our practice and have it convenient and have it hopefully not be too expensive. I think that's a really good thing, and we'll talk about that as well. So let's go on to the next slide. And I was going to give a long introduction for Rohit. I've known Rohit for, I don't know, how long has it been, Rohit? 5 years, 6 years?
It feels like it.
It does feel like it. Well, that's what people say that know me. It seems like it's always longer than it is. But I've known Rohit for a long time. He's CEO of Bright Squid Dental. One of the things that we probably won't be talking about too much tonight, but it'll be a great topic for another webinar, are some of these web-based portals that are coming up that allow you to exchange information, lab slips, things like that, have everyone involved in a HIPAA-safe environment. And he's the CEO of a company that's been doing that for a number of years. He's a bright guy. He's got a bachelor's degree in molecular biology, a master's degree in medical science, bachelor's degree in law. So he's one of those guys that can't have enough initials at the end of his name. But Rohit, it's definitely a pleasure to have you on the call tonight. And if you want to say anything more about yourself, we've only got an hour, so hopefully I can limit it. But thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks very much, Dr. Lavine. I mean, I've given myself here about 10 minutes to talk about myself and what, but no, not really. I'm going to dive into it pretty quickly. I think I know that you and I have had these discussions over the year around HIPAA compliance and about compliance in the practice and what's important and what's noise, and I'm hoping to talk in as clear a way as we can about that today. And I think the first question really is, why should you care? And I'm sure you've had this happen when you've walked into practices just like I have. I think when I think about this, the fact of the matter is that the basis of all the laws, the basis of all of this discussion really roots itself in the professional obligation of doctor-patient confidentiality. These aren't new concepts to be true. Doctor-patient confidentiality goes back to as long as there's been doctors and patients. And I think it's important, I think, for everyone to recognize that what the laws are trying to do in the regulations and the professional bodies are really trying to put some guidelines around some consistent approach to patient confidentiality. And I think it's important to realize that. Now, when we look at the actual laws, and as you said, we have lots of friends in Canada and the U.S. who are on this webinar, but there's lots of acronyms. We've heard of HIPAA, the high-tech modifications of the HIPAA Act. We have PIPEDA. And then, in addition to that, as you've said, there's provincial and state legislation, which also governs privacy, confidentiality on a number of levels, not just doctor-patient confidentiality, but in a number of different ways. And most of all of that, those regulations and the professional boards and so on, they're all interested in protecting PHI, protected health information. So I'm going to stay away from acronyms as far as I can tonight and still be effective in trying to convey the message. But I think the important element of this slide really is that we should care. And we should care because it's about doctor-patient confidentiality. There's lots of laws and everything else, but the bottom line is that it's about doctor-patient confidentiality.
I would add, Rohit, that the Attorney Generals, at least here in the States, definitely care. So if the practice doesn't care, there's a very good chance that the Attorney General does, and they will make sure that you care, especially if you're in violation of these rules.
Absolutely. And I've got a slide a little bit later which talks about some of the fines and other elements that we've started to see much, much more of in the past year and a half to 2 years. For the second question, the second burning question, what does compliance mean in the real world and the electronic world? And this is where, I think you and I could spend most of the rest of the night. I started doing HIPAA consulting when I lived in Seattle in about 1998. And at that point, what we were trying to do is keep the monitors that were in the doctor's office and the dentist's office, keep them from facing a window where people who didn't need access to that information might see that information. You know, the governing principle around the real world and the electronic world is exactly the same. We want to restrict access to that patient health information, that PHI, to people that must have it to deliver health services. And like I said, that's the same in the real world and the electronic world. The challenge with the electronic world is that there are multiple other requirements as well. So it's not just about keeping it private, which is important, but it's also about making sure that we track the access to it. Who had access to that patient health information? Who had access, or how is that transmitted? How is it stored and archived? You know, things that have real-world connections, but are actual guidelines in the HIPAA laws that need to be adhered to. And this is, I guess, back to the question around, is anyone watching? Clearly, there is. And what we've started to see in Canada, as well as, you know, when we're monitoring the Attorney Generals in the States, we're starting to see small and large organizations that have been fined for failing to be compliant. The change and the shift that I've noticed in the past year is that there are fines now being introduced for potential losses, not in actual losses and not in actual damage that occurred for that loss, but in potential losses. There's, you know, the sad one at the top, sort of in the center of the screen here, talks about the North Idaho hospice. I mean, I would have hardly have expected a hospice to be fined for a security breach, but in fact they were, and they were fined to the amount of about $50,000 because they basically disregarded any requirement in their office, in their operation, for a security breach. And so the fact that people aren't paying attention is actionable, I guess. In the top right-hand corner, and you can't see the information that well, I'm happy to send it to anybody afterwards. There's an Alberta surgeon. He was actually an orthopedic surgeon here in Alberta, Canada. And that orthopedic surgeon did something reasonably innocent, as you might think. He sent 3 pictures of his patients to some individuals. Well, unfortunately, one of those individuals was the wrong person. But that wrong person happened to know the patient. It wasn't a family member. It was someone who just happened to, by chance, know the patient. Well, the patient complained, not to, you know, the regulators, not to the lawyer, not to the Attorney General, but they complained to the professional board, to the board of doctors, and they felt, you know, that was a significant breach of doctor-patient confidentiality, and ended up fining that surgeon for about $13,000. Plus, he was sanctioned. He wasn't able to practice orthopedics for 10 days. And I think the reputational damage is the thing that obviously is the thing that got publicized in the province here. Quite a big concern. You know, and not to make too big of this deal, I think that, you know, the challenge here is that, you know, every dentist I've ever spoken to, every office I've ever been in, they've had disgruntled patients. And, you know, is anyone watching? Well, yes. And in fact, in some cases, it doesn't have to go any further than your patient watching. Most provinces and states have an ability for people to lodge a complaint with the privacy commissioner of that province or state, which will launch an audit or launch some sort of follow-up action. And that's where what we're seeing happening is it should be of greater concern to small practices, which are now exposed in ways that they haven't been over the past number of years.
You know, Rohit,
any thoughts?
That I would
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to add one thing here is that, you know, we're talking about the fines, and, you know, they can be very substantial. They can be as low, you know, not for first-time offense, they're not usually too bad. I think it can be up to about $25,000, which I guess is not, you know, peanuts, you know, but it's a significant. If you are guilty of what they consider to be willful neglect, in other words, we've warned you and you still didn't listen, Those fines, in my understanding, they start around $50,000 and go up to $1.5 million per incident.
That's exactly correct,
so
yeah.
It is substantial, but the one thing I would want to make sure that people understand is that even if you're not prosecuted by the Attorney General, even if you kind of escape that part of it, you are definitely not off the hook. If you become, in the States for sure, there's something called the breach notification. And what that basically says is that if you become aware of a breach, and a breach can take a lot of forms. Let's say you take a laptop or an external hard drive home at night and you leave it in your car and it gets stolen, or you see somebody, you're on your computer and all of a sudden the mouse cursor starts moving around. Obviously someone's logged into your system that you don't know who it is. You have a laptop that your emails get misplaced or sent to the wrong place or whatever. What the law says is that there are 3 things that you absolutely must do. Number 1, you have to notify every single patient of record with a letter, not an email, not a sign on the door, but an actual letter has to go out to every single patient, notifying them that there was a breach, what information was potentially breached. And usually we're talking about credit cards and social security numbers, things like that. Secondarily, you have to notify the local media, and the local media does not mean your Auto Trader magazine. It's a TV station, the newspaper, whatever. Third, you have to have your practice, and this is assuming that you have more than 500 patients, which most of us do. You have to have your practice listed on the Health and Human Services website. So even if you somehow don't get dinged by the federal government or by an attorney general, by complying with the breach notification, you are absolutely going to lose patients. Now, I can't tell you how many you're going to lose, but it could be devastating for practice to have to announce to all their patients, oh, sorry, we let your credit card and Social Security information get lost. So, our bad. They'll be
exactly right. Exactly right. And the other trend that I'm seeing, when I'm visiting dentist practices, is that there is sort of the sense that this is really about large hospitals, as you said in the introduction. My look back at the 2012 breaches was that there was at least half a dozen dental organizations that were included as a part of that breach. Now, at this stage, I think it's still the very large ones, like large insurance companies and so on, but it's coming, and I'm seeing the trend, as I'm looking through the data. So let's we'll spend a bit of time on question number 4. What's the difference between compliance and security? And I'll tell you, as a former lawyer, a guy who spent all of his time in the books, the difference in these definitions becomes pretty important. So the first piece of it is that the practice must comply with government regulations. So that's the part of compliance, and government regulations are HIPAA and PIPEDA and HITECH and so on. People confuse that sometimes with just being secure, which isn't enough. Of course you need to be secure, and what security really talks to is that the data, the patient data, has a level of obscurity that's kind of applied to it. So there's kind of a mathematical formula, if you will, that takes normal accessible information and obscures it, makes it difficult to access. And that's called encryption. Encryption must be data at rest, which means sitting on your hard drive or sitting on our servers and in motion. So however you transmit that information, it's got to be encrypted. So that's security, which is an important element, but not good enough to get compliance. For compliance, you also need consent. You also need your systems have to be auditable. And this is an important concept that I'll go over a little bit later. There has to be a backup system in place, an archival system, and further and further and further. And I've got a slide a little bit later on where I'm going to go through and show you this in a little more detail without making it overwhelming. What we don't want this to be is a class on HIPAA or really in terms of the details. It's more getting the larger terms in place. And so there's a difference between compliance and security. Security is an element of compliance.
Now, I would want to add one thing to that,
Sure,
talking
certainly.
about encryption. And with the HIPAA regulations, anyone that's looked at it is aware of the fact that there's two basic types of regulations. There's mandatory rules and what's called addressable rules. And I see people lecturing on the addressable rules making comments that I don't think are necessarily accurate. What an addressable rule basically says, and encryption is addressable, what that says is that you decide if it's reasonable. And if it is reasonable, you must do it. If it's not reasonable, you propose an alternative. And if there is no alternative, then you just document that there is no reasonable alternative. What I feel a lot of offices sometimes are making the mistake of is they think this is a get-out-of-jail-free card. That, well, we don't think it's reasonable and there's nothing else out there, so we're just going to document it. Now we don't need to encrypt. And I think that's a mistake because they've kind of glossed over that first part where is it reasonable to encrypt your data, whether it's on your server, on your backup, your external drives, online, whatever the case, is very easy to do and sometimes unbelievably inexpensive. I mean, there's programs that are free that you can do this with. I don't think that argument's going to hold much water if the HIPAA police ever come calling and you say, well, I didn't think it was reasonable. And they're saying, well, why isn't it reasonable? I mean, you could spend $50 a month and have, you know, encrypted emails. I mean, there's lots of ways you can get encrypted, and it's not really all that unreasonable. So I just wanted to add that in there, that even though
I really appreciate
encryption is addressable, I think you got to do it.
In fact, I would say that most of the fines and most of the data loss that I've seen when I've looked over, 2012 and 23 breaches and fines has to do with that loss of that data, whether it's sitting on a USB stick, whether it's sitting on someone's hard drive, on a laptop that got stolen. It doesn't really matter. It was addressable. It should have been addressable, and now that data is now available to whoever found it.
Yeah.
So let's talk about patient consent, and we'll start with the quote at the bottom. The patient consent, we see a lot of times where a dentist or a practice is very comfortable in the knowledge that they've got patient consent that allows them to send information. And there's a couple of nuances here that I need to get into without getting too far stuck into the details. So first of all, you should, it's arguable whether you must, but let's say you must, get the patient's approval to send patient information to other treatment providers. So if you're using a lab or if you're sending information to a specialist and that's your patient, it's your obligation to get that consent. Now, this is where it gets interesting. The dentist actually can get consent to send the patient their information over email. It's not covered by HIPAA. So for example, if you have a program in your office that sends an email to your patients that says you have an appointment tomorrow and you should show up, that's okay. You still should get their consent to make sure that they've accepted and agreed to the fact that they're going to be sent an email. So that's important. But that's okay because they're actually, that type of communication is not covered by HIPAA. What is covered by HIPAA is all of the communication about that patient with the other practitioners that you're working with to deliver that treatment or with the lab. And the patient actually cannot give consent to you to be able to have that communicated in an unsecure way. So it's an important nuance. So I'm going to just mention it one more time. It's the patient cannot give you consent to be able to communicate to your lab or your specialist or any one of your colleagues their information in an unsecure way. That's your obligation as a practice owner, as a dentist. It's your obligation to make sure that information is sent securely to another practitioner.
Rohit, we actually have a question related to what you just mentioned.
Absolutely.
And here's the question. It said, what's the route to go when a patient calls the office asking us to email a letter of treatment completion and a final x-ray to the general dentist in another state? It's just a phone call we go by. There's no written agreement.
Don't do it. I would say that you wouldn't want to send that by email, for sure. I'm going to talk a little bit about the system that we've introduced called Secure Mail, which certainly would be a good option for that type of communication. But I would suggest a post. Good old couriers and postmen in order to do that. Do not send that mail because ultimately the patient cannot consent to you sending that treatment to anybody other than themselves. They can say, send me that data or send me that information, but they cannot tell you to send it to someone else in an unsecure way. It won't hold water.
Now, when you say consent, does it have to be written, or is verbal acceptable?
I wouldn't ever do verbal, because then it becomes, unfortunately, a he said, she said game if it ever comes to a breach. Written consent always, in my view, that should be papered right in the patient file, and it's there for everybody's security.
So just to reiterate, because I have another follow-up question here.
Sure.
When we're talking about secure ways to share patient information, you're suggesting either something like encrypted email, a cloud-based portal like a Bright Squid. Are there any other options out there, or are those basically the two that we're talking about?
Yeah, those are really the ones that we're talking about. You know, from an electronic standpoint, you need to be able to guarantee, as I mentioned earlier, that data at rest and data in motion. And so those things have to be secure. They have to be archived. There has to be, you know, audit control to those things, and it really takes the sophistication of that type of service, of our type of service, like Bright Squid or like secure email, in order to be able to push that information back and forth.
Okay, so we still have a couple of questions here, so I'm not trying to get us bogged down here, but I think, you know, since they're relevant to what we're talking about,
this is excellent.
Get to them.
Please.
So someone, and I think this is my understanding, so someone put something in here that they thought consent was not necessary to another healthcare provider who is or will be providing treatment. My understanding is that you do need the patient's consent to do that. Is that correct?
Yeah, you know, there's actually some debate around whether or not it's absolutely needed. It's the best practice, of course, to get consent, but the debate that occurs, it comes in terms of necessity for treatment. And so there's a debate that says that the practice owner, the dentist, who's received the consent, if they, for the betterment of that patient, need to consult or consult with another practitioner, that it in fact could be, the argument could be made that for the best reasons, for the best case for that patient, that consent, even if consent wasn't there, that patient still, it was better served by that doctor communicating with another doctor in a secure fashion without the consent. But it is a best practice. I haven't seen that one be challenged that much. By the letter of the law, you don't have to have consent as long as it's you know, associated and required in the normal treatment. But I'll tell you, I wouldn't want to be challenging that one.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the challenge here as well, is that, you know, as I said, I've been to a number of HIPAA lectures, and it's, you know, there seems to be debate. I mean, some people say you have to have consent to share information between providers, and some people say you don't. And, you know, the question is, which side do you want to err on?
Yeah,
I guess,
yeah, no, and that's true, Dr. Levine, on so many of these elements. You know, how hard is it to get that consent when that patient comes and sees you? In my view, not that hard. It's a normal part of the intake process, or should be. With that consent, you're free to be able to speak with other treatment providers that are necessary to deliver treatment. I think it's a practice that's easy enough to do that. It demands it be done, I guess.
Okay. What about any opinions on password-protected PDFs as a secure way of sharing information? Yeah,
so that's a great question. I think there may be there is probably security. I don't know whether or not a password-protected file is actually encrypted, which is, as we've spoken about, probably something it should be. There certainly is protection against the access, but I don't know if it's how strong that protection is. The other element of it is it might be secure, but there's so many other elements to compliance, and so one of those elements is the auditability of that file. So, for example, if that file gets shared with one person, or 10 people, or 50 people, when that patient comes back to that dentist or that dental practice and says, "I want to know who saw my images," there has to be some way of accounting for or creating a real chain of custody for that PDF file. And that's where it gets very, very difficult, right? And so to be compliant, you have to have that auditability. You have to know what happened to that PDF. Even if it was password protected, you have to know what happened to it.
Okay. One more question here, and then I think we want to move on, and we'll certainly we'll come back around to some of the other questions that are coming in.
Excellent. This is great.
The consent, is there no expiration date on it? In other words, if someone signs the consent, are they agreeing to that? Is this something that should be renewed every year, like a medical history, or what's your feelings on that?
Yeah, I haven't seen consent need to be renewed by a certain date. Normally, as long as that patient is considered a part of that practice, that consent continues for the length of time. Now, certain technology changes might want you to renew that. So, for example, a best practice is to get the consent of a patient to send them an email, let's say. So that would call for a renewal of those consent agreements. I would say that's a great practice, again, reminding the patient, agreeing to that ahead of time. But I haven't seen the necessity of getting that renewed on, let's say, an annual basis or even every second year. I'd be interested in your experience around this too, Dr. Lavine, in terms of what you've seen in the field.
Well, the problem, of course, is that we're unfortunately not seeing a lot of people doing consents. As I said, there's debate about whether consent forms are even needed.
Sure.
But then again, for example, something with HIPAA where you're supposed to have business associate agreements with everyone that has access to your data, and I would say, maybe 1% of the practices we work with have even asked us to do that.
Right.
And it's another issue. You've got this whole issue of complacency, is that people don't feel that it necessarily affects them. It doesn't affect our day-to-day, and until you get nailed, you just sort of just go along saying, well, we'll take our chances, or it seems overly complicated. And I know that at the end we're going to talk a little bit about an email system that I think is going to address a lot of those issues.
Yeah.
But that is one of the issues, is that how do you deal with how do you deal with the complacency?
Yeah, well, I think, and in part, that's what I'm hoping that we can start thinking about with webinars like this, because there is a real issue. It's a risk to a practice, and because there are other systems out there that take care of these type of elements, it reduces significant risk for a practice.
Okay, well, let's move on. We're still getting a number of questions coming in. I'd like to circle back to those afterwards. I want to make sure we get to the content as well.
Sure. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on question number 6. We've already touched on a number of these elements. But what are the HIPAA requirements? Well, as you'd expect, there's elements here that are unique logins. So everybody in the practice who has access to patient data should have their own login, because someplace down the road someone may want to audit that, who had access to that information. That auditability is a critical element, and something that when we see with email or when we see with a lot of practices, there's no sense of that. Everybody uses the same login to access the information. That's a problem, because there's no logging control at that point. I don't know if it was I don't know who accessed those images. Now, where this comes up is if there's a breach, if there's a loss of data. Again, that patient has the obligation or the right really to come back to that dentist and say, I know that that picture was taken in this office. Show me who had access to it. And if everybody's using the same login, and if it's sent through email and it's off to a lab and you don't have any control of that, or it's off to somebody else's office, this is where it becomes very uncomfortable, because when you've taken that consent, you've taken the obligation of managing that data in a very specific way, which doesn't go away, and so they have the right to come back and ask about that audit control. There's also elements of data backup and storage, so you have to ensure that there's a backup systems in place, that it's available and retrievable when needed, and then ultimately data disposal. There has to be some plan for getting rid of that data upon request of that patient, or upon the termination of a certain period of time after that patient quits being a member of your practice. Now, the regulations seem to be changing with how long you have to store that data, and I've seen anywhere from 7 years in the U.S. to some people now considering it for the lifetime plus 10 years of the patient in some places in Europe where we're working. So lots of interesting stuff around that, but the point is that there has to be a plan for data disposal, and the opposite of data disposal is data retention. We have to know how long that data needs to be kept.
You know, one thing I would add here, looking at all these requirements, is that it can be very overwhelming, and I think most practices, you know, realize, or most people realize, that to get 100% HIPAA compliant is virtually impossible for a dental office.
Sure.
There's just too much out there, and what we've been telling people, and I'm not sure what your feelings are on this, Rohit, is that we've kind of narrowed down to basically 3 things. We said, number 1, and you've already stressed this, if you encrypt your data, encrypt the backup, encrypt the transmission. Secondarily, that how you're exchanging information with other offices, if you're encrypting it through email. And third, if you're documenting all your policies and procedures, you're probably going to be way ahead of the curve. You know, you're not going to be 100% HIPAA compliant, obviously, but if you focus on making sure you're encrypted and making sure your email's encrypted and making sure you document everything, you're really, you know, at least taking a really good first step in getting to that point.
I agree. It's a difficult event, and as I've said, you know, there's real-world elements of this as well as electronic world elements of this, and this can be quite a daunting task for practice. I think that as long as there are some basic elements, and I think you've identified 3 excellent ones that you're going to your practices with, I believe the same as you, that there's a lot of grace that's given for an organization that's working towards that and is implemented what they can to prevent the most obvious breaches. I think that's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah.
With respect to the HIPAA requirements, I would agree with something you said earlier. We use this as a template, but this applies to the PIPEDA requirements and some of the professional bodies in Canada. It also applies to the Safe Data Acts of the European Union, and so we're using HIPAA as an example, but it's not unique in what the criteria is. So let's talk a little bit about email again, and this is you know, the real-world experience that I've had that I'm sure a lot of the users are going to connect with, which is, you know, using email to transmit that data. So the fact is that when we look at it technically, there's a number of products that are not compliant, and you'll see those at the bottom of the screen. I've got a slide a little bit later about those. But when you're sending an email, the way the internet works is it takes that that information that you're trying to send between you and the specialist or you and the lab. It takes that information and sends it to a bunch of places around the internet before it's ever received by the recipient. The challenge that all of us have is that as soon as it leaves your computer, even if, or the 4 walls of your practice, even if you're secure within the 4 walls of your practice, when it's going through all of these middlemen servers, it's not compliant. And so there's an important element in there, and that's where encryption becomes an important statement in terms of how we protect that data. When it goes from my server to another server to another server to another server to another server, it can be intercepted at any point in that chain. Fact is that the dentists, the practices have a duty to take precautions to safeguard this patient data. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the confusion. And you've mentioned this earlier, Dr. Lavine. There's lots of thoughts. So I was in one of the, I was traveling and speaking in the States recently. And while I was speaking, someone Googled, you know, the American Medical Association and email. And they said, you know, look right here. It says physicians can use email. You know, if you see it right there, and if any of the listeners here go, they'll see this documentation. The challenge here, it says, so long as the physician uses reasonable and appropriate safeguards. So this is where we get into a very fuzzy area about what's okay and what's not okay. So I started to do research into what's the standard. What's the standard in communication with email for reasonable and appropriate safeguards? And I have found a number of guidance elements in manuals, hospital manuals by governing bodies, so the associations, Dental Association in Canada, for example, and they give these safeguards. Now, the fact is, here's the safeguards. Here's reasonable safeguards. The patient's consented to the use of the email, verification of the addresses, de-identify the information, which really, to me, challenges whether or not it remains patient health information, because if it's de-identified, transmit the minimum necessary, encrypt and decrypt the personal health information, and do not use email-sensitive information or any diagnosis. So, right, you could use email if you adhere to all of those elements, but it seems to me that all those elements require a different system. It's inaccurate to say you can use email if you're adhering to all of that guidance. And I'll tell you, it's a big challenge. So let me talk to you a little bit about services that we all use that we can talk about here. The first, at the top of the list, is Secure Mail, and I'm going to talk about that later on in my presentation. Apple Mail or Outlook. Is it compliant? Well, no. It's unlikely. It requires secure transmission, storage, audit. There's attachment site limitations and storage limitations apart from the compliance issues. So most offices that I know right now use Outlook in an unencrypted way. Typically, Outlook's being used in conjunction with a Gmail server or a Hotmail server or a Apple Mail server like me.com or something. None of those other systems are compliant. For those of you who don't know, Google reads all of your emails. There's no business associate agreement. It's not auditable or secure. It doesn't tell you how long it's going to hold the data. It doesn't give any sort of auditability with respect to any of that.
Let me interject something here, because I know we have a few questions about this. One of the things that Gmail talks about is their SSL compliance, but I'm aware as well that one of the things with Gmail is that it actually targets ads based on the content of your email. So I would think right off the bat there that's not obviously very secure. But are you saying, or what is your thoughts on the SSL compliance? So that really is not, a get out of jail free card?
Not at all. What it does is it does create a secure connection between the browser that's being used and a Gmail, but there's no agreement for what's going to happen to that data. We don't know if that information ultimately is encrypted. If it's unencrypted, it's probably unencrypted. It could be forwarded to someone who shouldn't see it. There's no auditability with respect to that. So, this goes back to that earlier question around, is security enough? Well, it's not, because we lose track of that email once it's sent on Gmail. We don't know who it's forwarded to, what the history of it is, and so on. So even if it is a secure connection, there's so many unknowns with that method of transmission. It is certainly not compliant. And there's lots and lots of documents created by the professional bodies, like the dental professional bodies, that talk about not using free email services for that reason. And to follow up on what you said, there's something now called Google Drive that some of the listeners might know of. Well, Google does the same thing with Google Drive. It's reading all of your documents and targeting ads to you based on what's in those documents. So you shouldn't be surprised when you go to your Gmail and see lots of ads for other dentists. It's a part of that. That's just how they work and how they make money.
Now there is, what about Google Apps? Are you familiar with that? Because I think it's a little different with Google Apps, isn't it? They do require an agreement, and it's not a traditional Gmail type of thing.
Correct. They do require agreements, but they're not anywhere near the business associate agreement that would be required to handle that patient information. You know, there's still no agreement around auditability. There's still no agreement around encryption or data destruction. None of that information is available in those Google Apps agreements. In fact, we're a Google Apps user, so I will personally use Google Apps for lots of things, but not for certainly not for storing any patient data or communicating about patients.
Okay.
Dropbox, you know, I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many organizations that I go into which use Dropbox to transmit large DICOM files or STL images because they're too big to email. They say right on their site that they are not HIPAA certified. So that's a practice that really should stop because they've put the big warning label on themselves. Don't use us. And SkyDrive, Microsoft SkyDrive is the same sort of thing. Any other questions around this, Dr. Lavine, that you think I should get? This is an important one because I think this is where it starts to hit home a little bit.
Okay. Well, we're getting a few questions about, you know, specifically about secure mail, and I'm not sure at what point we're going to get to that, but
well, I've got that.
That's where a couple of people are saying specifically, you know, they want a little bit more about, well, what are the options that are out there? But I believe that's like the 9th or 10th slide. So. Yeah.
Let me jump forward then. You know, what we hear as well when we go into an office is that, you know, what are the benefits of firewalls, or I have a firewall and therefore I'm HIPAA compliant. That's not true. Firewalls are important, and they're designed to protect it's software or hardware that's designed to protect the office or anything behind the firewall from unauthorized users gaining access to that information. So that's great for the four walls of the practice or the four walls of the lab, but it does nothing to protect personal health information when it's sent out of your office, which is really what we're talking about.
Yeah, you definitely need one. I mean, we install firewalls for every practice.
Oh my goodness,
we set up. You got to have one from a security standpoint, but you know, once there's so many ways. You know, the firewall is really designed to keep things out. It doesn't really prevent things from getting out. Even though a well-designed firewall can do that, but if you're sending something through unencrypted email, it's getting out there. So the firewall's not helping you at all for that.
You're absolutely right, and I would agree. I mean, I think it's reasonably standard now for people to have firewalls, you know, built into their routers that are managing all of their internet communication. And that's absolutely a must-have, but it doesn't really protect you in the ways that we've talked about today.
Right, and we don't typically put high-end firewalls. I mean, we're using the ones that typically come with a Linksys router or D-Link, whatever. They're, from a HIPAA standpoint, they're fine. They meet all the criteria. There's other ones out there. There's SonicWall. There's Zyxel. There's ones that are $400 or $500 routers, but for $125, $150, you can get a very good router with a firewall that's going to give you all the protection that it can provide.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that that's. I would say that spending a lot of money on a firewall and firewall technology is certainly not required. To be honest, I haven't seen a huge benefit from the organizations that have spent that type of money. Question number 9: how do you make your dental practice compliant? Well, there's certainly lots of discussion around this, and I think, you know, Dr. Lavine, you mentioned earlier, you focus on 3 elements to make it mostly compliant, which I think is the absolute right approach. We have to start with the highest priority ones, the easiest ones to kind of knock through. Our product, the one that I'm going to be spending some time today and actually demonstrating here in a few minutes, is a product called securemail.com, and it does exactly what the product says it should do, which is if you're communicating with other individuals around patient treatment, it provides a mechanism that's encrypted. We're fully logged, we're fully auditable, and all connections are controlled by the server in our organizations. And so I'm going to give a demo on that. I won't spend too much more time talking about it. And the final slide is just, you know, can compliance be convenient? This is one of the challenges. You know, when I do start talking about compliance, it almost feels like a burden that we've ended up, you know, dropping on a practice. And that's not the intention. I think that there's lots of benefits with using a compliant product like Secure Mail or Bright Squid Dental Link. There's an opportunity to have unlimited storage with our products. You can send 500 megabytes per message, and I have to tell you the number of labs and dentists that have been frustrated about trying to send high-resolution images through Outlook. You know, a few weeks ago I was spending time with one lab which demanded high-resolution images, and that person at the lab would get 10 emails, one image in each email, because the image was so large that email couldn't actually be sent. And so once they changed over to Secure Mail, now of course all 10 images could be attached to one email, and that would go securely to the lab. We've also got a number of other elements that I'll show you in terms of our image viewers and how the platform works. And the fact that it's very easy to use will be self-evident as well. So I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. I'd rather just show you. And so I'm just going to put my system here. I'm just going to take it out. And I'm going to log in to our server. Now I've got a demo account here to log into Secure Mail. It's a fully web-based system, so I'm using Google Chrome or Firefox or Explorer work perfectly well. It doesn't matter whether I'm on a Mac or a PC or even on a phone or a tablet. The system has been designed to work like that. I'm logging in here as a dentist, Dr. Pierre Fauchard, and I'm logging into our demo server. None of these names here are real because it's a demo server. So here I'm logging in. I'm seeing a message here. I've got 5 messages here. This message is from Mr. Edward Engel, who's a person at the lab that I tend to deal with. He's asked me to approve this work as Dr. Pierre Fauchard, and as you can see across the top here, most of it's very familiar. So one of the benefits of the product that we've got is that we have the ability to include high-res images, but even beyond that, one of the things that we've got is some tools here that I can actually help me communicate. So if I wanted to talk to the lab about this item here, I could draw a small annotation and just say, this is important. Of course, I would say more than that if I wanted to, but for the purposes of the demo, that's about all I'm going to do. As soon as I hit this check mark, the person who wrote that message actually gets a notification that says that image was modified by me. And so it actually reduces the amount of email that has to get created and go back and forth. So that's one of the examples. Let me show you how I could receive some more information. And obviously, if I'm working with the specialist with our systems can update. They can say, well, the implant looks good. Please see the photo attached. And of course, we take full images, the ability to manage this and modify this as well. I'm going to go pretty quickly here because, again, this is meant to operate just like email. One of the things I will show you, though, is one of the features of our product is that we actually enable the ability to view 3D STL images. And now the images I'm going to show are large. Each of them is about 15 megabytes. And then we've got them articulated in a 3D viewer. So it takes a little bit of time in order to show these images. But this is a facility that's reasonably rare over the web because of the size of the images and the complexity of what they're showing. Now, this viewer is courtesy of 3Shape, which some of you will know. 3Shape has developed a number of scanners, 3D scanners, and we've got the privilege of working with them in terms of creating these online viewers. Now, you'll start to see appear on the system the STL image. Now, I don't know if it's going to show the rotation as smooth as I can make it, but what you'll see is that I can increase, I can zoom it up, I can rotate it, I can turn it upside down, and I can actually fade out one or the other side of the jaw. And that's provided as a free part of Secure Mail in order to enable the type of collaboration and communication that we think is necessary between the lab and the dentist. We're seeing quite a bit more of that type of information come across our system. Now, with that brief introduction, I'm going to stop. It's as simple as you'd expect it to be. In order to respect everyone's time and energy, I'm going to get out of the demo and get back into the PowerPoint. Unless Dr. Lavine, unless you've got some questions here in terms of how that might work.
Oh, of course we have questions.
Well, you know what I'll do is, just before I leave, I will actually compose a message and show everybody how that works. So if I wanted to send it to, well, here's a W. I just have to enter, again, the first name. This is the specialist that I might want to share some information with. Share info about Sally Jones. I can go into one of my folders. I can take my images and simply drag and drop them into the actual software. And, you know, I can send referral forms. I can do whatever I want in here. We have the ability to read PDFs, Word files, JPEG images, as well as a whole host of others. And all I have to do now is send the message. Now, one thing I want to note here is I can attach up to 500 megabytes for this image. So a full DICOM study, for example, that a cone beam CT scan can be attached in email, and the recipient will be able to see it, view it, download it, and so on. So now that this message is sent, the recipient will be notified. And that's maybe a pretty good spot to jump back into my PowerPoint, because it's an important element of how our product works, because once that image is received, what happens is we don't want that user who's receiving that information to have to spend their whole day waiting for another email. What we do is we send a notation to their normal email. Now, the important part of this is, as you'd expect, no patient information is shared, but that recipient is notified that there's a new message, and that can show up on their, in this case, it's an Android device, to their normal email. It could be an Apple device, of course, or it could be Outlook. As soon as that person clicks on that link, what will happen is they will be taken directly to that image, and they can comment it, they can do whatever they need to do at that point, approve or continue that communication, and send that back. So, so I think that that's, you know, the simplest description that I can give in a short time on secure mail.
Rohit, thank you. This was
My
really
pleasure.
enjoyable.
Yeah, and thanks very much for your time, and thanks to all of your listeners. Very enjoyable for me too, so we need to do this again. Thank you.
We will do it again. So thank you, everyone.